I'm Elaine Ruffalo. I'm a Renaissance art historian.
Padua, or in Italian, Padova. It's a famous city. It's famous for many reasons. It's where Dante lived. It's where St. Anthony of Padua is buried. It is indeed the setting of Shakespeare's Taming of Shrew, and it has one of the oldest universities in the world. For me, the most important point on Padova is that Giotto's masterpiece, the Scrovegni Chapel, otherwise known as the Arena Chapel, is located. So what I'd like to do is a quick highlight of the sites of Padua. We're looking at our Traveler in Italy series. I'm going to go through that pretty quickly, and then I'm going to slow it down and take a very careful look at the great Giotto and the Scrovegni Chapel. So here we're already seeing an image of Padua, and we can take a look at the central location of Padua. It's right where you see that red dot, the central location right in an area of Italy called the Veneto. It has numerous rivers, and that meant that the whole area around Padua has been inhabited since at least the period of the Iron Age. The Romans called it Patavium. And they had a legend saying that Patavium was founded in 1183 BC, which would make it one of the oldest, if not the oldest city on the entire Italian peninsula. The myth is that the city was founded by the Trojan prince Antenor. Antenor was a hero in the Trojan War. While Troy was burning, he got out the back door. He took his people in a boat, and they escaped burning Troy. And where did they land? Patavium. And even today, the Padovani, as they're known, are going to try to perpetuate that myth by honoring their founder Antenor with his tomb. And that's what you're seeing right here in this picture. It means that Padua has the roots that go back to the earliest civilization in ancient Greek. And, this is interesting because it comes at a period where these foundation myths are trying to really give you a sense of civic pride. Every city that I've talked about on the Traveler series will have some kind of a foundation myth, and Padua pretty much trumps everybody because it goes back to Greek antiquity. So have a look at this for a moment, and it's interesting. This is called a ciborium, this whole structure around this object, which is the burial place of Antenor. However, between you and me, seems much more likely that that tomb dates back to about 500 AD, but it doesn't really matter. It's all about the civic pride in that foundation. Padua was a Roman town. There's no doubt about that. And as I said, it was called Patavium, as you can see from this map. It was founded in 45 BC, which would place it just around the time of Julius Caesar. It was important, to say the least, for the Romans. This is where Livy was born, in fact. And it was important because it was the intersection of two important rivers, the Brenta, where there's so many Palladio villas, and the Baccaglione rivers. And Padua was famous for excellent horses and wool. Taking a look at this map, you can still get an idea of Roman Padua by zoning in right here in the very, very center, where you can see what's called the Carde and the Decumanus. Those are the perpendicular roads that make up every center of every Roman town. I don't care where you are, and shows you the old Roman walls of Padua, which is pretty interesting because Padua is filled with canals. See, I mean, most of those are all filled now, but it was used in antiquity and then in the Middle Ages, using this good defense system of moats to protect the city. And by looking at this map, we can surmise that Padua was a city of about 30,000 people in 45 BC, which would make it really the biggest Roman town in northern Italy. Now, not much is left from that except maybe the shape of the very center, which was the Forum. But there is the remains of the old Roman arena. And that's what you're looking at here in this picture. The word Arena comes from the Roman word for sabbia or sand, arena, and the sand would be spread across the center of the arena, and it was meant to soak up the blood and guts from the animals or the gladiators that were slaughtered there. Pretty grim. But it's interesting because you can still see this, the remains of this, helping us also surmise the population of Padua by taking a look at the size of its arena. Also, Giotto, when we fast forward to 1305, his chapel is going to be attached to the arena, and that's why sometimes the Scrovegni chapel is referred to as the arena chapel. Okay, so what happens, of course? What will happen is that Padua, like so many other Roman towns, is going to crumble. The Roman Empire crumbles around the 5th century with invasions of barbarians, and Padua, being an important Roman town, is going to be particularly hit. First by Attila the Hun, and that's who you're looking at here in this painting by Delacroix. Then comes the Goths. The Byzantines are going to fight over Padua, and finally the Longobardi, or the long-bearded ones, will come in. And that's why there's very little left from the Roman town, because of these barbarians that come in. Okay, so where do the people of Padua, or Patavium, go? Well, they leave their town and they're going to head for the hills. And that's when they head for the hills. And if you look down below in the lower right-hand side, you can see the hills. They're known as the Euganean Hills. So Padua is basically is built in the middle of a crater of a prehistoric volcano, and the hills all around Padua are the tops of the crater. And hence, on the inside of the crater, there are many baths, terme, all around Padua. Even today, you can go to thermal baths, and the Romans love their thermal baths. That probably explains one of the reasons why the Romans settled there. The other place where people are going to head when the barbarian invasions come in is here, out into the lagoon. We call it today the Venetian Lagoon, but really Venice is going to be formed only during this period of late antiquity, when people are moving out into the lagoon for safety. Not only the people from Padua, but peoples from Ravenna, Aquileia, Grado, they move out into the lagoon for safety because, as I always like to say, barbarians are good on horseback, but they don't float. And therefore, the city of Padua will empty out, and it will not be filled again until we get to about the 12th century. And here we can take a look. This is a map showing us what Padua looks like, rising up again in the 12th century, really flourishing, taking the footprint of Roman Patavium and, of course, enlarging it. As you can see, all kinds of series of different city walls, as the city keeping those moats for protection. The next question you should have is, well, what were they doing there? And the answer is, Padua was enjoying an incredible period of calm and prosperity around 1100, because their economy was really based on the wool industry. And here you can see in the upper left-hand side a nice detail of these wool workers. They were also famous for the production of horses. Horse meat is even today still a specialty in Padua, and that harkens back to, of course, the Romans. And then, very important, on the lower left side of your screen, you can see pilgrimage. And peoples are coming from all over Italy, up and down, even Europe, to visit the tomb of Saint Anthony of Padua. So Padua will flourish because of industry, horses, and pilgrimage, which opens up what I like to call the golden age of Padua. Let me give you some dates for that. Let's say Padua opening up by the beginning of the 12th century, and then until 1400. And that's when you see all these buildings and monuments going up. By 1400, the Venetian Empire is going to take over Padua. In, let's see, 1407, it gets control of Padua, and Padua essentially is part of the Venetian Empire. But it's really during this period that all kinds of interesting things are going on, such as the university. Okay, so the University of Padua was founded in 1222 by a group of law students from Bologna who had become disillusioned with their professors. And they moved to Padua and founded the university in 1222, making it the second oldest university in Europe. And it's not known as the university, it's actually known as Il Bo. You can see that here in the lower section of the picture I'm showing you, Detto Il Bo, known as Il Bo. And the reason for this is, here's another view. The reason for this is interesting. It's because this group of students would meet at an inn. The owner of the inn made his money as a butcher. As a butcher, he put up the symbol of an ox, the skull of an ox, over the inn where the students were meeting. And the word bo is Paduan dialect for bue, which means ox. That's kind of a strange story, but that's why it's known as Il Bo. And in 2016, it was voted the best university in the world, which I think is really fabulous. So it's famous because it's the second oldest university, as I mentioned, in Europe. Many famous students attended the university, professors. Here's some of the professors kind of on these wonderful statues around one of the moats of the city, celebrating the different professors and students. And remember, everyone, Galileo lectured at Padua University from 1592 to 1610. And this is his famous lectern. The university likes to claim that this is the original, which goes back to the 17th century, which seems unlikely, but it doesn't matter. There's a bust of Galileo at the top, and behind are all the famous students of Padua University. This is, by the way, the time that Galileo is teaching at Padua University. He was using this period to improve his telescope. He made his first observations of the heavens. And at this period, he also discovered the 4 moons of Jupiter. Those of you who are garden experts should realize that the botanical gardens of the university go back to 1545. So together with Pisa, they are the oldest botanical gardens in the world. Little did you know how important the University of Padua is. And today it specializes in medicine, of course. Since 1595, Padua has had its famous anatomical theater, which would draw artists and scientists to study the human body during public dissections. The very first permanent anatomical theater in the world, preserved inside the bow, doing anatomical studies. Now, the last point before we turn to, here are all the different, some of the different graduates of Padua University. I thought you would find this interesting. The great chemist, the physician, Alberto Magnus, Copernicus, of course, the mathematician, Giuseppe Tartini, who is the composer, a great violinist, Andrea Vesalius for anatomy, William Harvey, who developed the theory of the circulation of the blood, Casanova, the great lover, Torquato Tasso, who was a poet, and the first female graduate of the university, Elena Lucrezia Corder, as a philosopher, graduated from Padua University. All right, the last point before we turn to Giotto is I wanted to point out Il Santo. The people in Padua call him Il Santo. We will call him Saint Anthony of Padua. I wanted to point that out because it's as if no other saint ever existed except for Saint Anthony. And he's buried in Padua. He's actually from Lisbon, but he's buried in Padua. And this incredible building becomes one of the great pilgrimage sites for people from all over the world to come and visit the tomb of St. Anthony. And his death day is, June 13th. I used to live around the corner from Il Santo, so I had the pleasure of seeing this mammoth, really hybrid building, simply known as Il Santo, which was construction was begun only 1 year after the saint's death in 1232, and it was completed in 1310, which is, an incredible, very quick building. Here's the side of it, just to give you the feel of the enormity of this. And it really is a mix of Romanesque, Gothic, Byzantine. Take a look at the domes, which are reminiscent of St. Mark's in Venice, giving us this hybrid style, emphasizing the unique position of Padua between east and west and north and south. Let's step inside for a moment. Wow, every inch of this interior is decorated. You don't know where to rest your eyes first. Unlike many buildings in Italy, which have a decorative exterior, sometimes you step inside and it's rather plain, like Florence Cathedral. Instead, here, the Basilica of St. Anthony, which is not the cathedral, by the way, is filled with decoration, overwhelming, showing us how really very used it is. And the pilgrimage that people will make will come to see the relics of St. Anthony. His jawbone, which you're seeing here, vocal cords, which is another reliquary, and his tongue. When I was living in Padua, let's see, it was 1989, somebody stole his tongue and held it for ransom. And the Padovani, the people of Padua, they paid the ransom, brought it back, and it's back installed within the church. Now, I realize the cult of relics is rather strange for some of us, but realize it brings money and prestige to the city, and people really believe in St. Anthony. Now, I wanted to inform you that this great artist will come to Padua in 1435. So Cosimo de' Medici, the great banker of Florence, he gets exiled from the city of Florence in 1434. Okay, and where does he go? He goes to the Venetian Empire, and Padua was part of the Venetian Empire, as I mentioned earlier. And he stops in Padua, he goes up to Venice, the Venetians really embrace him. Only 1 year later, he's back in Florence because the economy had fallen apart without him. So he goes back to Florence and basically becomes the ruler, not in name, but in function of Florence. In thanks for the Venetian Empire helping him, Cosimo is going to send his friend and his favorite artist, Donatello, to go up to Padua and Venice. And here's the image of Donatello. Donatello presumably goes up reluctantly. He said he didn't love Padua. He said it was a city of fog and frogs. However, he ends up staying there for the next 10 years. And I just wanted to show you some of the objects that Donatello creates for Il Santo, the high altar. Now, I realize that this image is a little hard to see because it's such a busy interior, but let me just point out, these are all bronze. So here's the, and then I'll do a close-up. The Madonna's here, she's flanked by St. Anthony and St. Francis. Then you've got the crucifix up above, other saints, low reliefs, all done in expensive, beautiful bronze. Here's a nice close-up. Isn't that gorgeous? Again, expensive because it's bronze. The patina, or the treatment on the surface, makes it almost look like milk chocolate. Notice the way the Madonna seems to be getting up. She's passing us the body of Christ. And Christ looks like a little baby. I'll get in closer, kind of with this soft, supple skin. Then there's quotations from classical antiquity, these two female figures looking like harpy figures. And Mary, very, very beautiful, in motion, with a clasp here holding closed her drapery, which is an image of a seraphim. The image of St. Francis over here on the left, and St. Anthony on the right. They seem to be individualized, and this is the high Renaissance that has arrived to the city of Padua. Also, the crucifix, if you can see, this loincloth was added on later, a nude figure of Christ done by Donatello, emphasizing the body of Christ, the nobility of Christ. This is our man of sorrows, a real man dying on the cross. You can see his veins, his his muscles. He's tightening up his stomach muscles, the beautiful handling of the body, showing us what looks like a heroic Christ with great dignity. Yes, suffering, but a kind of humanism or human look at the image of Christ. Now, last thing by Donatello is he will be commissioned to do an equestrian monument right outside the Santo. So here's where we were standing before, this rather odd hybrid style. And over here on the left-hand side is the first equestrian monument since classical antiquity. This is a tomb marker, and then a horse at the top with an effigy of the man who's buried down below. It's a close-up. And again, it is something many people have studied in 101 art history. This is known as the Gattamelata. Gattamelata is a nickname for the character who's riding this horse, whose real name is Erasmo da Narni. He's known as Gattamelata. It's sort of a playful name, which means honey cat. Well, he was anything but a honey cat. The guy was a mercenary general, very ferocious, and he oftentimes would fight for the Venetian Republic. And because Padua was under the Venetian Republic, they give him a monument, really celebrating his prowess, his aggressiveness, even though he's got that kind of opposite nickname. All right, so take a look, just back up a little bit. This is all done in bronze, all done the lost wax technique. So the figure is hollow. This first image, this aggressive man on top of this horse. Look at the way he's striding away from the Santo. He's going off on his adventures. Donatello is emphasizing these curves, the curve of the back of the neck of the horse, the curve of the back of the Gattamelata, the rump of the horse, and finishing it up with this decoratively tied tail of the horse. Now, Donatello is still not quite sure of himself, so he lifts up the front leg of the horse and balances it on what looks like a cannonball, trying to show off a little bit. And later on, we'll see with equestrian monuments, they try to outdo that. If a man can control a horse, he can control a city-state or an army. Here's another good look at it, all done in bronze, of course. He was the mercenary general. Look, he has a lance and his horse, and he was really free to work for whatever city-state paid him well. That's where we get our term freelance, by the way. All right, so we'll leave Donatello aside. Now it's time to turn to Giotto. Giotto di Bondone, you can see his dates there, 1267 to 1337. He was born in Colle Vestiano, which is about 35 kilometers from Florence. And we know a lot about Giotto. Vasari talks about him extensively. Contemporaries will talk about him. Vasari tells us he was a shepherd boy and he was discovered by Cimabue, and he will bring us into or out of the Byzantine period into the Proto-Renaissance. Tradition tells us that he painted in Assisi with his teacher Cimabue, and in 1305, he goes to Padua to paint the Scrovegni Chapel, which is fascinating. Here, just to give you an idea, this is the difference between the Byzantine style by Cimabue on your left and what Giotto is doing in the Proto-Renaissance. Naturalism, a sense of light, a sense of space, a rapport with the individual, whereas his teacher Cimabue remains in a much more Byzantine style. Even Dante talks about Giotto, which is, as you can imagine, really fascinating. He's going to say, once Cimabue thought to hold the field as painter, Giotto is now all the rage, dimming the luster of the other's fame. So realize that Dante gets exiled from Florence, just about the same time that Giotto is sent to paint the Arena Chapel. Dante was in Padua, Giotto was in Padua, so I think it's not a big stretch to think that perhaps they knew each other. And just as an anecdote to Giotto once more, Giotto comes to Padua. Let me just give you an image of Giotto. Back up, there he is. In the 1970s, they decided to try to find the bones of Giotto in Florence. And they found bones just where Vasari said they would be. They did a forensic examination and they found that the bones undoubtedly belonged to a painter, as the bones had a high level of arsenic and lead in them. And they also found that the bones belonged to a very short man who was barely over 4 feet and who may have suffered from dwarfism. In fact, Vasari and Boccaccio describe Giotto as being really unfortunate looking, saying that there was no uglier man in the city of Florence. And there's an old legend that Dante would visit Giotto in the Arena Chapel, and Giotto's children were always underfoot. And Dante would ask Giotto, how in the world can you create such beautiful pictures and such ugly children? To which Giotto replied, really without missing a beat, I made them in the dark. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it kind of gives you a little bit of insight to the character of Giotto, which I have to say is typically a Florentine, without a doubt, bringing Florence to basically to Padua, which, there's a nice long tradition of that. So now let's turn. This is the Arena Chapel, and also known as the Scrovegni Chapel. So one of the leading, the city's leading banking families in Padua were called the Scrovegni, like the Medici to Florence, the Scrovegni to Padua. And their head of the family in the 13th century was somebody named Reginaldo Scrovegni, who was a flagrant usurer, charging high interest for loaning money. And he was so famous for this that Dante would place him in the Inferno in Canto 17 with a bag of coins around his neck. Now, Reginaldo's son, whose name was Enrico, he continued in his father's footsteps, but later on he became a little bit troubled by the possible consequences of being a usurer. And in 1302, in order to expiate the sin of usurer, get rid of it, get rid of the sin of ill-gotten gains, he began to erect a chapel to which he dedicated to the Virgin of Charity, Santa Maria delle Caritas. And that's what you're looking at here in this image. Now, because the chapel was erected on the remains of the old Roman arena, you can just see the first arch of the arena here on your right. It is also known as the Arena Chapel, and it was connected to the Scrovegni family palace. See, here's the old palace, which was around all the way into the 19th century, 18th century. And if you look where the circle is, this is the Arena Chapel, the original entrance, and here are the remains of the old arena. So work on the chapel really proceeded very, very quickly. And there's a document telling us that of recording the dedication of the chapel as early as 1303. And by 1304, there were already indulgences granted by the Pope to visitors to the chapel. And it gets formally dedicated on March 25th, Annunciation Day in 1305. Now, here it is again. Now, to decorate the interior of the chapel, Enrico Scrovegni hired Giotto of Florence to come up. He was the most important painter, hands down, of the early 1300s. But I wanted to mention that Giotto also may have been the architect of the chapel. Because if you look at it, especially the view now, you see that there's 6 windows on the right-hand side, which would illuminate the interior beautifully. Otherwise, there's very little exterior decoration, flat walls all the way around to allow Giotto to fill the interior with beautiful frescoes. It's a little more than a box designed to accommodate an extensive fresco cycle. And let's step inside. Wow, amazing. Giotto was commissioned to paint scenes of redemption of humanity, really beginning with the Annunciation to the Virgin Mary, all the way to Last Judgment. And the scenes that you're looking at come specifically from a source. They're not from the Bible necessarily, but they come from a source called Jacopo Voragine's The Golden Legend. Here it is. I would say that this is the most important decorative monument in all of Italy. And that says a lot. This brings us to the early Renaissance. This is the importance of Giotto bringing the early Renaissance to the city of Padua. Now, as we go through the scenes, I want you all to keep in mind some important details. So the stylistic elements and motifs to look for in Giotto Scrovegni Chapel: empirical perspective. We're not to a point that we can see one point perspective, but he's getting kind of close. Consistent depth of illusionistic field. So we feel as if we're looking into a scene that is believable. There's a real sense of human emotion. He uses color to move your eye through the picture plane. The composition, he'll also many times repeat the motif of embracing. Tableau vivant means it looks naturalistic, as if these people are actors on a stage. And of course, Voragine is the author of the Golden Legend, from which these scenes are taken. Let's step inside. Once again, just to give you a feel of how you read this, you go, look at my cursor, left to right and across and back. Left to right and across and back. Left to right and across. So you walk around, and you can see it's rather unembellished architecturally, but instead filled with these really fabulous scenes. And the ceiling is all covered with this gorgeous blue lapis lazuli. Imagine the extraordinary expense that the Scrovegni family went to make these blue starry sky, which is a symbol of heaven. And right here in the center is the Virgin of Charity. Okay, so let's get started with the scenes, which are really interesting. So again, this is apocryphal. This is called the expulsion of Joachim from the temple. Joachim is coming to sacrifice at the temple, and he's kicked out by the priest because he doesn't have any children. And what Giotto does to convey this is he juxtaposes the image of the priest with this little boy, and the exterior where you can see Joachim, who's the father of the Virgin Mary, being pushed out into this blue abyss. Look at that detail, how this priest is forcefully getting his hand right in his collar as if he's taking him to shake him up. And Joachim's holding the little lamb that he was going to sacrifice and being pushed out into this empty space. Then Giotto in scene number 2 gives you this empty space. So it's a kind of a ploy to continue from left to right. And we can see Joachim despondent. His head hangs down. See his old gray beard kind of coming under his chin. And the two shepherds who look at each other as if to say, shall we accept this guy? Giotto was able to paint suspicion, despondency. Well, if they weren't ready to accept him, certainly the little dog down here below recognizes that indeed Joachim is a good guy, and he goes to live amongst the shepherds. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, what's going on? His wife, whose name is Anna, she's the mom of the Virgin Mary, she's received word from this angel who's come in through the window that she will become pregnant with the Virgin Mary. And that's a miracle because Anna's, she's like 100 years old or something. And she's kneeling down, and Giotto has done this nifty thing of giving us an interior in 1305, which is like stepping into someone's home. Take a look. Here's Anna. She's older. You can see the creases around her mouth. There's this striped coverlet behind her. Take a look at this chest up against the wall. I see perhaps a mirror or a pot, cups, a little shelf up above. Here we can see the curtain has been pulled back. And this woman weaving or spinning on the left, which probably alludes to the idea of fate. So what Giotto does is juxtaposes the exterior scene of the father and the interior scene of the expectant mother. Angel tells Joachim to wake up and head off because indeed his wife is pregnant. I just wanted to show you some of the details of this naturalism that Giotto's able to give us. Certainly Giotto must have been a shepherd outside of Florence because he's been able to paint these lambs and rams so realistically. And here, The Kiss at the Golden Gate, one of the great paintings of the 14th century. And the first image that we see of embracing. So Anna and Joachim come together outside the gates of the city. They embrace. People are excited. They're celebrating. Read it with me left to right. There's a shepherd that comes in on the left-hand side. Giotto cuts him off in half, giving us an idea that he's coming from a real place into an exterior space into this whole scene. That's what I mean by tableau vivant. Then the couple comes together, forming this arch, which is repeated by the arch of the Golden Gate, which is repeated by the arch of the bridge and the arch under the bridge. He's using that compositional motif to make the painting look interesting. The ladies come pouring out. They're very, very excited. And we get close to Anna and Joachim. Everyone, this is the first kiss since classical antiquity. How do you paint love? How do you paint concern? Because certainly Joachim is concerned about his elderly wife giving birth. You can tell he places his hand poignantly on her shoulder. She reaches up. Her hands get all caught up in that old gray beard. They're coming so close together that even their halos are going to mix. The only discordant note in the whole scene is the image of this woman in black, who still really remains to be seen exactly what she means. Is she referring to the fate that will befall the Virgin Mary with the death of her child? Is she reflecting, is she supposed to be an Old Testament figure or someone refusing the idea of the Virgin Mary? Or maybe she's just turning away because she doesn't like all that smooching going on. So again, naturalism, love, and warmth. And of course, the Virgin Mary is born. Here we are in that same interior I showed you earlier, and she begins her adventure. Now we leave Joachim and Anna, and we see the scenes from the life of the young Virgin Mary, where she goes off and she's presented to the temple. She's only 3 years old. Anna helps her up the stairs, and she's accepted to live with all these little virgins inside the temple. What I wanted to point out about this is the unusual composition of the diagonal and how Giotto emphasizes or places most of the figures in the picture plane on the left-hand side. But he makes sure to balance it by giving you these two male figures on the right, and this one holds up his hand and gestures. See how if you picked up your hand and canceled them out, the painting composition would fall apart. But Giotto anchors it and directs us back to the Virgin Mary through that gesture. So at this point, the Virgin Mary is going to be betrothed, and the bachelors are all trying to bring their rods to the temple. Who's ever rod flowers will win the hand of the Virgin Mary. It's all phallic in the end. And indeed, this old man, not only does his rod flower, but a big old dove lands on top of it. And of course, we know that this character will be, of course, Giotto. Look at the young, shy Virgin Mary in this pose of humility, already looking pregnant, but that doesn't happen until here. So we're looking now back towards the altar space, and Giotto's using the curve of this space. This whole section is the altar. He uses the curve of the wall to help tell the story of Annunciation. On the left is the Annunciate Gabriel, who announces to the Virgin Mary on the right that, of course, she'll be pregnant with Christ. So let's look at this carefully. He ties up this curtain here, lifts up the arm of Gabriel, giving it this kind of U-shaped form, And then your eye goes to the curtain that is coming out of this balcony. So he's giving us this movement and across and over, and then it goes right over the arch to this cloth or curtain, to the U-shaped gesture of the Virgin Mary, to the tied up curtain. So repeating motifs to help move our eye across the composition. Notice also now the Virgin Mary, she looks much more grown up, much less like a shy young girl, and much more like the Queen of Heaven, who's ready to take her place really in history. And she's recognizable in her red, clearly pregnant now. And here's our second embracing scene. It's called Visitation. Mary and Elizabeth are embracing. Elizabeth is, of course, pregnant with John the Baptist. John the Baptist leaps up in her womb, recognizing the Savior just one womb over. I also like the way Giotto tries to differentiate the ages of the young Virgin Mary and her older cousin Elizabeth. Another embracing scene, this time of maternal love. So you see there this interesting motif of human emotion. So this is nativity, clearly, with Joseph, down at the bottom, kind of asleep at the wheel. The Virgin Mary reclining. She's just given birth. So the embrace at the kiss of the Golden Gate is concern, this elderly couple. The visitation is kind of a sisterly or familial love between cousins. And this is, of course, absolute love between mother and child. Oh, isn't that a beautiful image? The Virgin looks down at her son with great concern. Christ looks up into the eyes of his mother. He's all swaddled up beautifully. Mary's wearing that red dress and a blue, beautiful blue shawl, which unfortunately most of the blue has flaked off. But the colors here are vivid and beautiful. How do you paint love? How do you paint this maternal concern? And Giotto, I think, has captured it beautifully. Okay, so we get these adventures. Interesting, this detail at the very top of this painting where you can see a star, which is recognizable as the star that the three magi are going to follow. But in 1303, a comet passed over the city of Padua. And according to some historians, this might reflect what Giotto saw. Here's another embracing scene, mother and child. This time she is very erect. She's riding a donkey. It's called Flight into Egypt. They are escaping the fate of every firstborn who will be massacred by the order of Herod. Giotto now is also helping support the composition with the background, giving us two dramatic hills that go up behind the Virgin Mary, kind of giving them an aerodynamic sense of movement. They move forward, the angel points the way, and the figures are anchored to the background. And they are, of course, avoiding this horrible massacre of the innocents. I wanted to show you this detail. They did a cleaning of the Arena Chapel just a few years ago, and you can see the streaks of tears that are coming down the faces of the mothers. Now, Giotto must have understood that no one standing on the floor of the Arena Chapel looking up high would ever see this. It seems to me almost a personal kind of investigation of human emotion. Look at their faces. Wow. These poor children. Now we go, Christ grows up, and we see the scenes from the life of Christ. So we leave the Virgin Mary's life, shift over to Jesus and his miracles. This is Christ, who is going to multiply the wine and the loaves for at this party, which is the wedding at Cana. I always like the juxtaposition of this big chubby guy drinking his wine with these barrels right in front of him. Giotto's so interesting on how he individualizes these characters. And the Virgin Mary is almost looking over as if to say, take it easy with all that wine. Here is the raising of Lazarus. Again, little details to point out. Lazarus was buried for 3 days, hence he's not going to smell very good. And that's why you see these figures who are covering up their faces with masks or drapery so they don't have to smell the body of Lazarus, who's clearly decaying. Nice detail. Entry into Jerusalem. This is, of course, Palm Sunday, and you can see the children who are climbing up in the trees. They're tearing off branches to lay before Christ, who's entering into Jerusalem on what looks to me like the same donkey his mother was riding a few years before. People are so excited. You can see down below that they can't lay down their drapery fast enough for Christ. This one looks to me like she's getting all caught up. She's got the sweater stuck over her head. These little naturalistic details makes the painting quite colloquial, and you can even kind of hear the snapping of the branches up above. Now, Joseph, of course, the life of Christ will end with tragedy, and that will be for one part because of the betrayal of Judas, who betrays Christ for 30 silver coins, and who's making him do it? Of course, the devil. And the Kiss of Judas, this is again one of the all-time great paintings of the 14th century. This painting, along with the Kiss at the Golden Gate, I would say are the two paintings that are a must to study in the history of art. Here we can see Judas, who reaches up right after Last Supper, is kissing Christ. Christ is shown in this beautiful profile. He's a proud, handsome figure with a very luscious, beautiful, glowing halo. And he looks right into the eyes of Judas. Here's a detail. Look at that. Judas is described here looking more like an ape than a man, with this heavy brow, his eyeballs kind of rolling back into their sockets, reaching out to give Christ a big smack. So this indeed is another embrace, but it's an embrace of betrayal and jealousy rather than warmth and love. And Giotto surrounds these figures with the Roman soldiers, and he repeats, look, the noses, the eyes, the eyeballs, which gives it this this sinister look, certainly. Let's go back for a second. Then also notice that you have this explosion of standards and torches and horns and lances that look like exclamation points, all coming down to the fulcrum, which is the Kiss of Judas. That is a great painting. Crucifixion, of course, grief, lamentation, the last embrace. This time, Mary and Christ coming together for one last time. Giotto has managed to give us an idea that Christ is indeed in rigor mortis. Two figures shown from the back. They look rather like flour sacks. And what they're doing is purely compositional. They make us look at the Virgin and Christ, and they compositionally bracket the two figures. Notice also how Giotto uses the landscape, as he did with the entrance into Jerusalem, using the landscape to zip down and bring us right to the face of Mary and Christ. John the Beloved plays a big role here. He's bending over. This is such an interesting pose as well. See how he places his hand here. That's empirical perspective, giving us an idea that the figure's arm continues into the scene. And he's in that position specifically because it's the pose of an eagle. And what will be the symbol of John the Beloved? He becomes, of course, John the Evangelist, symbolic by the eagle. Okay, Christ's life is over, but he comes back. And this is, of course, Last Judgment. And Last Judgment occupies the entire entrance wall. and presents really the culmination of this whole process of redemption that was begun on the altar wall of the chapel. So Christ sits in majesty in the center of this composition. He's flanked on the left and right by angels and seated apostles. He gestures to his right to the elect and casts down the sinners to hell. Let me give you a close-up. Here he is, showing us his wounds. Left side are the sinners. Right side, he brings them up. He's in this rainbow, telling us that something supernatural is going on. And of course, it's Last Judgment. The gates of heaven are being unrolled by these wonderful militant-looking angels. Here are more angels who look like they're in bleacher seats, holding the objects of the Passion. Here are some of the elect who are being brought up to heaven. Some of them are recognizable. They're being ushered in by these different angels. I can see where my cursor is, for example. That looks to me like it's St. Dominic. Here looks like St. Francis, St. Augustine, etc. Maybe Justinian here. And then down below, these funny little figures that are coming out of the ground, and they're all nude. These are going to be the figures who died before Christ could be born, and they were stuck in limbo. And now they're coming out, and their flesh is coming back on their bodies. Also, continuing with the elect, keep in mind that there are recognizable figures in here as well. For example, this character with the poet laureate crown, that's got to be Dante. And of course, here, this character with the yellow hat, kind of not very handsome looking, we think might be, in fact, Giotto. After all, he painted it. He deserves to be in the elect. Now, in the lower right quadrant is a vision of hell with a large personification of evil. And he's devouring the damned just over the door, just over that right-hand side. Now, this image of hell is really over the top, and I don't think any of us miss the fact that it is an image of hell being described by Giotto in paint right about the same time that Dante is describing hell in the Divine Comedy, specifically in the Inferno. And again, did Giotto and Dante know each other? I think that's completely possible. These terrible tortures are reminiscent of what Dante was writing about. According to what you did in this world, you could be punished specifically in the next. And these are almost too much detail. As you can see, people being hanged by their genitals. It's really horrific, by their tongue, by their hair. Devils fighting over figures. Giotto's imagination has run wild. Down below. Now, right here in this bottom section, this is one of the most important details in the entire Arena Chapel. What you see just over the door is the image of the donor, the guy that paid for it. Is right here where my cursor is. That is Enrico Scrovegni, and he's in this kneeling pose of a donor presenting his chapel as a model to these three haloed figures. Which probably represent the Virgin Mary, the Mary the Annunciate, and Mary of Charity. And the eccentric placement of Enrico Scrovegni with these heavenly figures and his model of the Arena Chapel seems to be explained by the fact that on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, a beam of light enters into the building from the south window and illuminates this entire scene. Isn't that fascinating? This man that's holding up the model is probably the father, Reginaldo Scrovegni, because remember, as I talked earlier about, this is all about the expiation of the sin of usury. Okay, so last images I wanted to point out are going to be the series of images along the lower floor, the lowest section of the chapel, which are virtues and vices, painted in something called grisaille, which means faux marble. I can see prudence on the left and ire or envy on the right. I see justice, a world commanded by a woman, interestingly enough. Justice holding the scales of justice, and injustice, a male ruler, where things are overgrown, women are being carried away, warfare is normal. And then I see temperance, a woman wrapping up a sword on the left, and infidelity on the right-hand side, a man tied to a statue of a woman. Hope, the figure reaching for a crown, and of course, despair of this woman who has hanged herself. Charity, woman holding a bowl of fruit and flowers and standing on bundles of money. And here, envy. And that ends us with the wonderful image of Padua, which I like to entitle Saints and Sinners, and of course the Scrovegni Chapel and Giotto. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I certainly hope you all learned something.